told about self-improvement is wrong? What if chasing perfection is the very thing keeping you trapped, and the true power you're searching for doesn't come from fixing yourself, but from finally accepting who you already are? We grow up believing there is something wrong with us. Not loudly, not aggressively, but quietly, persistently, subtly. From the moment we become aware of ourselves, the world begins to whisper instructions. Be better, be calmer, be stronger, be smarter, be more disciplined, be less emotional, be less awkward, be more successful, be more lovable. And slowly, without realizing it, we absorb a dangerous belief. Who we are is not enough. So, we begin the project of self-improvement not as a joyful act of growth, but as an attempt to fix something broken. We don't ask, who am I becoming? We ask, what must I erase to be acceptable? Perfection becomes the horizon we chase, always visible, never reachable. Every flaw becomes an enemy. Every mistake becomes evidence. Every moment of weakness becomes proof that we are failing at being human. But here is the paradox no one tells you. The more you chase perfection, the more fragmented you become. Because perfection demands rejection of parts of yourself, of emotions, of instincts, of experiences that don't fit the ideal image. You learn to suppress sadness, anger, fear, doubt. You learn to perform confidence even when you are breaking inside. You learn to smile when you are exhausted. You learn to shrink your truth to fit expectations. And in doing so, you lose contact with something essential, your wholeness. This is the quiet tragedy of modern self-improvement culture. It promises empowerment, but often delivers self-surveillance. It promises freedom, but creates a constant sense of insufficiency. You are always becoming, but never arriving. Always improving, but never at peace. So let me ask you something uncomfortable. What if the problem was never your flaws? What if the real prison is the belief that you must transcend your humanity to be worthy? What if perfection is not the path to freedom, but the obstacle blocking it? This is where self-acceptance enters not as surrender, not as complacency, but as rebellion. A refusal to participate in a system that profits from your self-doubt. True freedom does not begin with becoming someone else. It begins with allowing yourself to exist fully, honestly, imperfectly, without apology. We are told that growth is always good, that improvement is always progress, that becoming better is the highest form of self-respect. But rarely do we ask why we feel the need to improve in the first place. Pause for a moment. Listen carefully. Beneath the polished language of motivation, beneath the confident tone of self-help culture, there is often a quieter voice, one that does not speak of curiosity or love, but of fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being left behind. Fear of being ordinary, invisible, replaceable. Most people do not chase self-improvement because they believe in their potential. They chase it because they are afraid of their current reality. They believe that who they are now is unacceptable, and who they might become someday is the only version worthy of peace. So, improvement becomes a form of escape. Escape from insecurity. Escape from shame. Escape from the feeling that something fundamental is missing. We tell ourselves that once we fix our flaws, once we control our emotions, once we master discipline and productivity and confidence, then life will finally begin. But it never does. Because the mind that believes you are incomplete will always find another reason to delay your worth. This is the hidden wound inside modern self-improvement. It doesn't teach us how to grow. It teaches us how to monitor ourselves endlessly. We become observers of our own inadequacy. Every thought is evaluated. Every emotion is measured. Every behavior is judged. Am I doing enough? Am I calm enough? Am I successful enough? Am I healed enough? And slowly, without noticing, we stop living inside our experience and start standing outside ourselves, watching, correcting, criticizing. The self becomes a project, and projects are never finished. There is always another flaw to fix, another habit to optimize, another version of yourself that seems closer to acceptable. And with every attempt to improve, the bar quietly rises. Peace is postponed. Belonging is conditional. Self-respect is delayed. This is why so many people who appear disciplined, successful, and self-aware still feel deeply exhausted. Because improvement driven by self-rejection is not growth, it is survival. It is the nervous system constantly asking, "What must I change to be safe?" And the body never relaxes under that question. Think about how it feels to be constantly corrected, even gently, even for your own good. Over time, correction erodes trust. And when you treat yourself as something that needs constant fixing, you lose trust in your own instincts, your own emotions, your own pace. You stop listening inward. You start obeying external ideals. And the cruelest part? The more you improve, the more distant you feel from yourself. Because improvement without acceptance does not integrate, it fragments. You become the better version and the unacceptable version, locked in quiet conflict. The confident mask on the outside, the self-doubt humming underneath. This is why self-improvement often makes anxiety worse, not better. Because anxiety is not the absence of control, it is the fear of being unacceptable if control slips. And control is exhausting. The mind was never meant to be a prison guard. When improvement comes from fear, the body tightens. When it comes from shame, the heart closes. When it comes from comparison, the soul goes silent. And yet, we are praised for this struggle. We call it discipline. We call it ambition. We call it strength. But deep inside, something knows this is not freedom. Freedom does not feel like constantly proving your worth. Freedom does not require self-surveillance. Freedom does not demand perfection before peace. This is where self-acceptance enters not as an enemy of growth, but as its missing foundation. Acceptance says, you are allowed to exist without conditions. Not because you are flawless, not because you are finished, but because you are human. And this is what changes everything. When you accept yourself, improvement no longer comes from fear of rejection. It comes from relationship. You don't try to control yourself. You try to understand yourself. You don't punish yourself into change. You support yourself into growth. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and begin asking, "What do I need right now?" This question softens the body. It slows the breath. It brings you back into presence. From this place, growth becomes natural, not rushed, not violent, not forced. And here is the paradox most people never discover. The moment you stop trying to become worthy, you begin to change in ways you never could before. Because change rooted in acceptance is sustainable. It doesn't burn you out. It doesn't turn against you. It doesn't require you to abandon yourself along the way. You don't grow by becoming someone else. You grow by finally allowing yourself to be here, whole, imperfect, breathing, and for the first time, there is a version of you that you rarely meet, not because it is hidden, but because you were taught to look away. From an early age, you learned which emotions were welcome and which were not, which reactions earned love, which truths created discomfort, which parts of you needed to be quiet in order to belong. So you adapted. You softened what felt too intense. You silenced what felt inconvenient. You controlled what felt dangerous. And what could not be controlled, you buried. This is not a failure of character. It is a survival skill. Every child learns, consciously or not, that love often comes with conditions. And when belonging is at risk, the psyche does what it must to protect itself. It divides. One part becomes acceptable. Another part becomes hidden. This hidden part is what many traditions call the shadow, not because it is evil, not because it is wrong, but because it exists outside the light of approval. The shadow holds everything you were told not to be. Your anger, your jealousy, your grief, your hunger for attention, your fear of abandonment, your desire to be seen without performing. And because these parts were never allowed to speak, they learn to whisper from beneath the surface. They leak into your life in subtle ways, in sudden reactions that surprise you, in patterns you swear you don't choose, in relationships that repeat the same emotional wounds, in a quiet self-sabotage you cannot logically explain. The shadow does not want to destroy you. It wants to be acknowledged. But when we are taught that certain emotions are unacceptable, we begin to judge ourselves for having them. We don't just feel anger. We feel ashamed for feeling it. We don't just experience fear. We criticize ourselves for being weak, and so the shadow grows heavier, not because it is dark, but because it is unheard. Carl Jung once said that the shadow is everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, and what we refuse to acknowledge does not disappear. It waits, it watches, it learns how to get your attention, often through pain, often through repetition, often through moments where you ask yourself, why do I keep doing this? The answer is rarely discipline. It is usually disconnection. When you reject parts of yourself, they do not become obedient. They become unconscious. And unconscious parts drive behavior far more powerfully than conscious intention. This is why willpower fails, why affirmations feel hollow, why positive thinking collapses under stress. You cannot outthink what you refuse to feel. The shadow is not an enemy to defeat. It is a message to receive. Your anger may be protecting a boundary you never learned how to set. Your jealousy may be pointing to a desire you were taught to suppress. Your anxiety may be carrying unexpressed grief. Your numbness may be a response to feeling overwhelmed for too long. When you label these experiences as flaws, you miss their intelligence. Because emotions are not problems. They are signals. And the shadow speaks the language of signals. Self-acceptance begins here, not by indulging every impulse, but by listening without condemnation, by saying, I see you, I hear you, you don't have to scream anymore. This moment is deeply unsettling for many people, because to meet your shadow is to meet the parts of yourself you worked hard to outgrow, outthink, or outperform. It feels like moving backward, but it is not regression. It is integration. A psyche at war with itself cannot be whole. When you stop fighting your shadow, something unexpected happens. It softens, not because it has been conquered, but because it no longer needs to hide. The parts of you that once felt dangerous begin to reveal their purpose. Your sensitivity becomes empathy. Your anger becomes clarity. Your fear becomes discernment. Your vulnerability becomes connection. This is the alchemy of acceptance. Light does not destroy darkness. It understands it. And when you understand yourself, you reclaim energy that was once spent on suppression. You breathe deeper. You react less. You feel more grounded in your own body because you are no longer split. You are no longer performing wholeness while feeling fragmented inside. You are present, and presence is power. Most people spend their lives trying to outrun their shadow, believing it holds their weakness. But the shadow holds your depth, your humanity, your truth. And when you finally turn toward it, not with judgment, not with fear, but with curiosity, you discover something profound. You were never broken. You were protecting yourself with the only tools you had. And now, you are ready for something else. Not control, not perfection, but wholeness. And in that wholeness, there is a quiet strength that does not shout, does not prove, does not perform. It simply exists. And for the first time, you are no longer afraid of your own reflection. There is a sentence many people repeat quietly to themselves, often without realizing it. When I fix this, I'll finally be okay. It sounds reasonable, even responsible, but listen closely to what it implies. It implies that peace is conditional, that worth is postponed, that your right to rest, to belong, to feel whole, exists somewhere in the future after enough correction has been applied. So life becomes a waiting room. You are always almost there, almost healed, almost confident, almost complete, and the present moment becomes something to endure rather than inhabit. This is the myth of fixing yourself. The belief that you are fundamentally unfinished in a way that disqualifies you from peace now. But here is what no one tells you. There is no final version of you waiting at the end of self-work. No moment where uncertainty disappears. No stage where fear never returns. No identity that remains stable forever. Human beings are not broken machines. We are living systems, always shifting, always responding, always becoming. Trying to fix yourself assumes there is something static and defective at your core. But what if what you call broken is actually unfinished experience asking for integration? What if the anxiety is not a flaw, but a nervous system that learned vigilance to survive? What if the self-doubt is not weakness, but an intelligence shaped by uncertainty? What if the habits you judge are adaptations that once kept you safe. When you try to fix yourself, you approach your inner world with force. Control the thought, eliminate the emotion, override the impulse. And for a while, it might work. But control does not heal, it suppresses. And suppression always returns, usually louder. This is why so many people feel like they are constantly starting over. They fix one part only to find another breaking. They heal one wound only to uncover a deeper one. They achieve one version of themselves only to feel strangely empty inside it. Because healing is not about erasing symptoms. It is about understanding origins. And understanding requires patience, not aggression. Self-acceptance changes the direction of attention. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this?" you ask, "Why is this here?" That single shift transforms the inner landscape. You stop treating yourself as an enemy territory to conquer. You begin treating yourself as a history to be understood. Every reaction becomes meaningful. Every pattern becomes a story. Every struggle becomes a message rather than a malfunction. And when something is understood, it no longer needs to demand attention through suffering. This is why acceptance feels threatening to the fixing mindset, because acceptance removes urgency. And urgency is how control maintains power. The fixing mindset says, "Change now or you are failing." Acceptance says, "Stay here long enough to listen." And listening takes courage, because when you stop trying to fix yourself, you are left with something unfamiliar: silence. Not the peaceful kind at first, but the quiet where emotions you've outrun begin to surface. Grief you never allowed yourself to feel. Anger you were taught to suppress. Longing you convinced yourself was unrealistic. This is why many people return to fixing. Because fixing feels productive. Acceptance feels vulnerable. But vulnerability is not weakness. It is contact. Contact with your body. Contact with your emotions. Contact with your reality as it actually is. And from contact, real change emerges. Not forced, not rushed, not performative, but organic. A nervous system that feels safe does not need to self-sabotage. A mind that feels heard does not need to scream. A heart that feels accepted does not need to hide. This is the irony. The more you try to fix yourself, the more resistance you create inside. The more you accept yourself, the more naturally you evolve. Acceptance does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop attacking. And there is a profound difference between discipline and violence. Discipline says, "I will support myself through difficulty." Violence says, "I will not allow myself to be human." Most people don't realize how violent their inner dialogue is. The constant pressure, the relentless standards, the refusal to rest without justification. Self-acceptance interrupts this cycle. It does not say, "You are done." It says, "You are allowed to be here." And when you are allowed to be here, growth stops being an escape route and becomes a response to life itself. You change not because you are ashamed of who you are, but because you are connected to who you are. And that kind of change lasts, because it does not require you to abandon yourself on the way forward. It carries you with it, whole, breathing, present, not fixed, but alive. A hardened sense of confidence that never wavers. But the kind of power that lasts, the kind that does not collapse under pressure, is much quieter. It is not built through perfection. It is built through self-trust. And self-trust does not come from fixing yourself. It comes from staying with yourself. When you accept yourself, you stop abandoning your inner experience in moments of discomfort. You stop overriding your instincts to meet expectations. You stop silencing your truth to maintain approval. And something subtle begins to form, a sense of internal alignment. You no longer need to check constantly whether you are allowed to feel what you feel. You no longer scan the room for permission to exist. You no longer need to rehearse who you are before you show up. This is power. Not because you dominate others, but because you are no longer divided within yourself. Division weakens. Integration strengthens. Most people leak energy all day long, not through action, but through inner conflict. Wanting to speak, but holding back. Wanting to rest, but forcing productivity. Wanting to leave, but staying to avoid discomfort. Each time you override yourself, you teach your nervous system that your own signals cannot be trusted. And over time, this creates fragility. Because a person who does not trust themselves must constantly rely on external structure to feel safe. Rules, validation, control, certainty. But life does not offer certainty. And so the person who has not cultivated self-trust feels powerless when circumstances change. Self-acceptance reverses this process. When you accept yourself, you begin listening inward again. You notice tension before it becomes burnout. You notice resentment before it becomes anger. You notice exhaustion before it becomes collapse. And because you are listening, you respond earlier, more gently, more wisely. This is strength. Not the strength of endurance at all costs, but the strength of responsiveness. A tree does not become strong by resisting the wind. It becomes strong by bending with it. The same is true for the psyche. Acceptance teaches you how to bend without breaking. It allows emotions to move through you instead of getting stuck. It allows mistakes to inform you instead of defining you. It allows vulnerability to deepen connection instead of triggering shame. And as this happens, something unexpected emerges. Confidence. Not the loud kind, not the performative kind, the quiet kind that does not need to announce itself. You begin to speak more slowly. You choose your words more carefully. You say no without rehearsing explanations. You say yes without betraying yourself, because you are no longer negotiating your worth. And people feel this. They may not be able to name it, but they sense it. Presence, a groundedness that does not rush, a clarity that does not argue, a calm that does not depend on outcomes. This is why self-acceptance is quietly disruptive. A person who accepts themselves is difficult to manipulate. They are not easily shamed. They are not easily rushed. They are not easily controlled by fear of exclusion, because their sense of belonging is internal. They belong to themselves. And when you belong to yourself, you engage with the world differently. You don't cling. You don't chase. You don't shrink. You choose. Power, in this sense, is not about always being right. It is about being rooted enough to be wrong without collapsing. It is about being open enough to change without losing yourself. It is about being present enough to feel deeply without being overwhelmed. And this kind of power cannot be performed. It must be lived. It grows quietly, in moments no one applauds, in choosing rest instead of self-punishment, in telling the truth instead of protecting an image, in staying with discomfort instead of escaping it. Each of these moments strengthens the bond between you and yourself. And over time, that bond becomes unshakable. Not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer facing it alone. You have yourself, fully, honestly, without conditions. And that is a kind of power no perfection could ever give you. Most people do not fear being seen because they are empty. They fear being seen because they are human. Because being seen means being revealed without armor, without preparation, without the safety of performance. It means allowing someone to witness the parts of you that are uncertain, unfinished, and imperfect. And for many of us, that feels dangerous. Not because we are weak, but because we learned early that visibility came with consequences. That honesty could cost love. That vulnerability could invite judgment. That authenticity could lead to rejection. So we adapted. We learned how to present, how to adjust, how to edit ourselves before the world ever could. We became fluent in reading rooms, sensing expectations, and shaping ourselves accordingly. And on the surface, this looks like confidence, but underneath, it is often exhaustion, because when you are always managing how you are perceived, you are never fully present. A part of you is always watching, correcting, protecting. Self-acceptance begins to loosen this grip. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly. It begins when you stop rehearsing who you are before you speak. When you allow your voice to be exactly as it is, steady or trembling, certain or unsure. It begins when you let yourself pause instead of filling silence. When you let your emotions move through your face instead of hiding behind control. These moments may feel small, but they are radical. Because each one says, I am allowed to be here as I am. And slowly, the body responds. The shoulders soften. The breath deepens. The nervous system begins to settle. You realize something important. You are not unsafe because you are visible. You are unsafe when you abandon yourself to stay invisible. The more you accept yourself, the less you need to hide. Not because rejection disappears, but because it no longer feels like annihilation. You understand, on a deeper level, that being misunderstood does not erase you. That being imperfect does not disqualify you from connection. That being seen is not a threat, it is an invitation. And this changes how you relate to others. You listen more. You perform less. You speak with presence instead of urgency. You no longer try to control how you are received. You allow yourself to be experienced. And paradoxically, this makes connections safer. Because people can feel when you are real. They relax in your presence. They lower their guard. They sense that they do not need to perform either. Authenticity creates permission, not through words, but through embodiment. This is the quiet freedom of being seen, not the spotlight, not attention, but the freedom of not hiding, of not editing your humanity, of not shrinking your truth to be acceptable. It is the freedom to exist without constant self-surveillance. And in that freedom, something opens, a deeper intimacy with life itself. You taste moments more fully. You feel conversations more deeply. You experience presence instead of anticipation. You are no longer bracing against rejection. You are no longer negotiating your worth. You are here. And being here fully, imperfectly, honestly is enough. Not because you are flawless, but because you are real. And real is where freedom lives. There is a quiet fear many people carry when they hear the words self-acceptance. A fear that acceptance means stopping, that it means settling, that it means lowering standards and giving up on growth. But this fear comes from a misunderstanding, because acceptance is not the end of movement, it is the end of violence. Giving up says, nothing can change. Acceptance says, this is where I am, and those are not the same. In fact, they lead in opposite directions. When you give up, energy collapses inward. When you accept, energy stabilizes. Acceptance does not ask you to like everything about yourself. It asks you to stop fighting what already exists. And when you stop fighting, you free up an enormous amount of energy that was being spent on resistance. Think about how much effort it takes to constantly oppose your own reality, to argue with your feelings, to suppress your needs, to criticize your pace, to shame yourself into action. This is not motivation. It is pressure. And pressure eventually creates collapse. Acceptance changes the tone of the inner relationship. Instead of pushing, there is listening. Instead of demanding, there is responding. Instead of forcing change, there is space for it. And change thrives in space. A plant does not grow because it is shamed for being small. It grows because the conditions support it. The same is true for you. When you accept yourself, you are not saying, I will never grow. You are saying, I will not grow by abandoning myself. This distinction is everything. Because growth built on self-rejection always carries fear in its foundation. Fear of failure, fear of regression, fear of not being enough again. And fear-driven growth is exhausting. It burns hot, but it does not last. Acceptance creates a different kind of momentum, a steady one, a grounded one. You begin to notice what actually helps you instead of what you think should help. You rest when you are tired. You speak when something matters. You slow down when you are overwhelmed. And from this honesty, growth becomes aligned, not rushed, not forced, not performative. You don't improve to escape yourself. You evolve in relationship with yourself. This is why acceptance is often the turning point. Because the moment you stop fighting who you are, you stop leaking energy. And that energy becomes available for creativity, for courage, for change that feels true instead of imposed. You don't wake up suddenly transformed. You wake up less divided, less harsh, less brittle, more present. And from presence, right action emerges naturally. Not because you are disciplined, but because you are connected. Acceptance does not remove responsibility. It clarifies it. You are no longer reacting to an inner critic. You are responding to your actual life. And this response is wiser, kinder, more sustainable, because it comes from self-respect, not self-attack. So, no acceptance is not giving up. It is choosing a different foundation, one that does not collapse under pressure, one that does not require constant punishment, one that allows you to grow without losing yourself along the way. And from this foundation, movement becomes possible again. Gentle, honest, real, not because you are pushing forward, but because you are no longer holding yourself back. Transformation is often imagined as something loud, a breakthrough, a dramatic shift, a clear moment where everything finally changes. But the kind of transformation that lasts rarely announces itself. It arrives quietly. It begins in moments so small they almost go unnoticed. A pause where there used to be self-criticism, a breath where there used to be panic, a gentle "it's okay" where there used to be pressure. Nothing looks different from the outside, but inside, something has softened. You no longer rush to fix what arises. You no longer panic when discomfort appears. You no longer treat uncertainty as an emergency. And this is how you know change is happening. Not because life becomes perfect, but because your relationship with imperfection changes. You begin to move through your days with less resistance. You still feel sadness, but you don't drown in it. You still feel fear, but you don't become it. You still make mistakes, but you don't disappear into shame. You remain present, and presence is transformative. Because when you stay with your experience instead of escaping it, it completes itself. Emotion pass, tension releases, understanding emerges. This is the quiet work of acceptance. Not fixing, not forcing, not performing, just staying. Over time, this staying becomes a way of being. You notice that your inner voice is softer, that your body feels less guarded, that your choices feel more honest. You begin to trust yourself not because you have mastered life, but because you are willing to meet it. And this trust changes everything. You stop living as a problem to be solved. You stop measuring yourself against imagined ideals. You stop waiting to become someone else before you allow yourself to live. You are here now, breathing, feeling, enough. And from this place, life opens. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of comply. You listen instead of judge. And without realizing it, you are no longer trapped in the endless pursuit of perfection. You are free, not because you have transcended your humanity, but because you have accepted it. If something in this reflection resonated with you, if these words felt like a mirror rather than a lesson, then you are not alone. This space exists for those moments of quiet understanding, for those who are tired of fixing themselves, for those who are ready to come home to who they already are. If you'd like to continue this journey, you're invited to subscribe to Wakeful Wisdom. Share this with someone who might need permission to breathe a little more gently, someone who is exhausted from striving, someone who is ready to stop running. And if you stay here, we will continue exploring these questions together slowly, honestly, without force. Until next time, be kind to yourself. You don't need to become anyone else to belong. You already do.